A quick thank you to all of my Patreons, and a special shout out to Lemu, Firebringer Axel, and Enigma Desu for pledging the higher tiers. Your support is heavily appreciated. Makoto Shinkai. Chances are you know who he is, or at least the movies he's made. If you didn't know, Shinkai is the man behind the famous anime film Your Name, which completely exploded into popularity worldwide, with Weathering with You coming out soon behind. His popularity cannot be understated, especially in the modern anime film landscape. When it comes to Shinkai though, I'm a bit of a weirdo with my tastes. And well, I just wanted to talk about why that is. If you've been on this channel recently, you may have noticed a slight change in content. I'm making less Type Moon focused stuff and expanding into general anime and fiction. And well, the cause of that is really simple. I just want to keep talking about stuff I like. I don't really make videos for profit, nor because I love editing, but rather it's really just because I want to talk about things I'm into and share my thoughts on them. Nothing more than that really. So I've always been trying to do that to keep myself motivated into making content. And well, you've read the title. This video is sort of going to be like an experimental embodiment of that idea in the form of a long rant or casual essay. But I'll say in advance that while that is the case, this is no factual or analytical thing. It's just me pinpointing what certain media means to me and sharing to others what I personally see in them. Nothing more. This is just my own documentation on my relationship with Shinkai films, and more importantly, what each and every single one of them means to me. Obviously, when we talk about a relationship, we start at the beginning, and well, I think many people won't be surprised at where I started. Like a huge amount of people, my first exposure to Shinkai was through the massively successful Your Name released in late 2016. See, I actually got into anime very recently. Outside of things I watched casually as a kid like Kikaider, Pokemon, Sailor Moon, and UFO Baby, I wasn't really a quote-unquote anime fan until I got into the Gundam series in, well, 2016. So 2016 was basically Man-Pig's year of anime birth, where I would get into stuff like Mecha through Gundam, Type Moon through Fate, Key through Clannad, and of course, eventually, my friend told me about the recent screening of Your Name and how it was a very hyped movie. Being the newbie to anime who loved to experience all the new stuff, I was curious and yeah, I joined him. And well, I was awed. Regardless of whether you love Your Name or think it's grossly overhyped, watching it in the cinema was a goddamn unforgettable experience to me. With its gorgeous visuals and its great use of sound, I felt insane immersion in a grand way I hadn't felt most anime had given me at that point. Now, the story itself wasn't much that resonated with me, but that first experience itself, for me as a bright-eyed, blooming anime fan, looking in at the beautifully realistic countryside landscape through Makoto Shinkai's art was just wonderful. It's an experience that I'll always look fondly on for that reason alone, even though my opinion on the film isn't quite the same as it used to be. And well, if you didn't know me already, one thing I love to do when I finish something I liked is to search up the creators and see if they did other stuff. That's literally why I'm an Ishinomori fan, why I'm a Nasu fan, Maeda fan, etc. And that's how I found Shinkai and found out about his other works. She and Her Cat, Voices of a Distant Star, The Place Promised in Our Early Days, Children Who Chase Lost Voices, The Garden of Words, and of course, the piece that most people regard to as his best, as well as the film I would watch next, 5 centimeters per second. While Your Name was technically where I began my Shinkai journey, 5 centimeters per second is where I considered myself to truly become a Shinkai fan. If you haven't seen 5 centimeters per second, I'll just say that right off the bat, this isn't a film for everyone. At least not in the same way Shinkai's more recent movies have been. Compared to a film like Your Name, 5 centimeters per second is very realistic. A bit painstakingly so. 5 centimeters is essentially a story about 2 childhood friends and their increasing distance as time goes on. How their lives keep moving past the time they were together, and unlike most fiction, 5 centimeters per second is a work that tries to capture the situation in a more realistic sense. Makoto Shinkai did this because he himself was in a long-distance relationship at one point, and is able to be as realistic as it is because it came from a man who went through such things. When it comes to anime, 5 centimeters per second was an experience like no other that I've had. a slow, painful burn of a realistic relationship between two individuals. It took a lot of time for me to realize what exactly made this film different to me, and well, it's in the title. It's their distance. Shinkai's films are often about distance between two people, and it conveys that feeling of longing, that desire to see someone close to you, be it a best friend, a dear member of family, or a treasured lover. Shinkai's films use distance and having his characters have some sort of barrier, which replicates that feeling you get when you dearly miss someone and just want to see them again. That's what made 5 centimeters per second special to me. I felt the characters' struggles, their emotions, their downfalls, and they're really hard not to feel empathy for, in my opinion at least. 5 centimeters per second is the opposite of your typical romanticized, well, romance anime. It's just a real experience, one that will hurt a bit and make you feel dissatisfied but also give you a strange bit of hope at the end. I felt this effect extremely hard because I watched this about the time when one of my closest friends at that time was moving away from town, and while I've tried to keep in contact with them, we've inevitably drifted apart. So, the story does hit really close to me and left me with a feeling of void that I had never felt to such an extent until then. It left me constantly thinking about it for weeks on end, and while most people would usually dislike that sort of thing, I saw it as a good kind of suffering. One that leaves an impact in a way that makes it personal, unforgettable, and, well, special to me. After that film, I would go and watch Voices of a Distant Star, which was Shinkai's first major work. Voices of a Distant Star is a story about a boy and a girl in a futuristic yet nostalgic world. The boy is a normal person, but the girl is a prodigy that was recruited into becoming a pilot for a large spaceship. They keep in contact with phone mail, but as the ship goes farther from Earth, so do their messages. The story itself is very similar to 5 centimeters per second, but it's a lot more hopeful in its depiction. What's amazing about Voices to me is that it was essentially made by Shinkai's two hands. From sound design, to art, and writing, virtually everything was made by him, with only a bit of support here and there. Even the two voice actors at the time was just him and his girlfriend at the time. It's crusty, and definitely doesn't hold up from a pure visual standpoint, but for being made in 2002 and for it being made by one single person, it truly amazed me. Not just that, but it inspired me. It inspired me because one singular person had made this entire piece. When I watched it, I always had that in mind. Shinkai alone created this entire story, this world, these visuals, and I was amazed. That was when I realized I wanted to create fiction as well. I wanted to be the one person that could birth a simple yet beautiful story like this one. One that, while many people would see as riddled with flaws, maybe one other could appreciate it for the world and the characters in spite of them. Of course, I love the story of Voice of a Distant Star as well, showing the distance between the two characters being an impossibly large one, yet it manages to be so much more hopeful in spite of that. It's because of all these reasons that I consider Voices of a Distant Star to be my second favorite Shinkai work right after 5 centimeters, despite all of its flaws, and despite from an objective standpoint is really just not as polished. After that, there's She and Her Cat. If you didn't know, She and Her Cat is the first ever work Shinkai's made, but it can hardly be called a film. It's more like a short. A 5-minute video about a cat and his relationship with his owner, as well as how they feel for each other despite not being able to understand each other. Shinkai usually has two major themes in his work, one being distance, as I already said, and the other is the exploration of what love truly is or what it can be. She and Her Cat is a story about what love could be for an animal and their human, and later on there was a short OVA made for the story that fleshes things out into a proper narrative that interests you. After that, I watched The Place Promised in Our Early Days, which I have a sort of interesting relationship with. Early Days has a world that's very similar to Voices in that it has a realistic, nostalgic atmosphere with a bit of sci-fi elements. Placed Promised has the most complex plot of a Shinkai film at the time, where after Japan was separated, people began erecting a strange tower that stretched to the skies. Instead of focusing on that though, we follow two boys building a plane to reach it. They share the project with a girl that they both like, however once the girl falls into a coma, they lose the motivation to build it and grow apart. early days with a movie that I thought was good in parts, but also had other parts that I found massive problems with. The big thing was, despite the backstory, the history and immersion wasn't well built since the film had only focused on the main characters rather than the overall world. I thought the film had fantastic ideas and borderline perfect atmosphere, but it was held back because it didn't explore everything. Now, that was my view on it for a very long time. However, after rewatching it, I was instead focused more on the relationship between the characters, and I could see how I was trying to give a message of how different people cope and react to different things in different ways, as well as enjoy the atmosphere and environment that the film took place in. It managed to depict a warm, nostalgic summer and cold winter super well, and overall, while my initial problems with it still do hold true, I ended up loving it way much more than before on a rewatch. The next film is Children Who Chase Lost Voices, which, unlike other Shinkai films, takes a radically different approach in setting and world. Children essentially focuses on a girl in the countryside who meets a mysterious boy who she falls in love with at first sight, but who dies soon after. She then hears about a mysterious underground land known as Agartha, which is the land of the dead, and after a bit of a spiel, she manages to travel to Agartha and tries to bring the boy back to life. Children is a strange movie. It's far more fantasy than most of Shinkai's works, and is also by far the one least based on romance. The romance here is hardly developed, and mostly acts as a driving force to the adventure, rather than being a focus on the plot. And I'm gonna be real, to me it wasn't as compelling. Don't get me wrong, I like this film too, as the art and animation are amazing, the world is super expansive, the direction is ultra high quality, and the world of Agartha is beautiful, but it wasn't what I looked for in a Shinkai film. It's very reminiscent to a fantasy like from a Ghibli film or Made in Abyss, but it completely lacks the feeling of longing and distance that his previous films had. When we touch on Garden of Words, which was the final film I had yet to watch, it was a lot more like She and Her Cat, where it tackled the topic of what love truly is, but instead of a pet and its owner, it instead tackles a taboo love, more specifically the love between a student and his teacher. Garden of Words is by far the most uneventful movie out of his library, being based more on the characters interacting and, more importantly, the atmosphere. Garden of Words, in my opinion, has one of the best atmospheres of any work, period, capturing modern Asia and the rainy season that the film glorifies perfectly. It is a film that I know a lot of people will have trouble enjoying, but one that I appreciate for the atmosphere and the kind of questions it asks about love and our perception of it. After that, I took a break with the Shinkai watching because, well, I had finished the library. But about 3 years later, Weathering with You came out in theaters, and of course, I was completely ready to give it a watch. Now I'm just gonna preface this. Weathering with You is a fantastic film and also one that I really liked. However, I noticed one thing was different about my enjoyment of it when I saw it. I was enjoying it more as a general flick, rather than what I had come to love about Shinkai's earliest works. There wasn't that feeling of longing once again in Weathering with You. While I enjoyed Weathering with You, it was also what made me notice that modern Shinkai films no longer had that sense of distance and void that earlier works like Voices and 5cm had, at least not to the extent that I had come to love. Shinkai, to me, stood out not just because of their art, not just because his movies were well made, and not even because of the fun stories, but rather just because it was one that offered me a unique feeling that most other anime, let alone anime films, would give. That feeling of longing. Capturing that emotion inside had given me a great sense of relatability to the characters and the situations that they had. It gave me a sense of nostalgia and unique atmosphere that just wasn't present in films since Garden of Words. So, what was the point of me telling you this? I mean, I don't know, I just wanted to share my take. Okay, but really, it's made me think about how people enjoy media and that sometimes a good piece doesn't have to appeal to everyone. To me, I think films like Your Name and Weathering with You appeal to a much more general casual audience due to having that more of a regular plot and more standardized storytelling that more people can casually enjoy. And that's fine. And I also don't think that Shinkai should stop making his films this way if he enjoys them. If he thinks that this is how he wants to make his films onward, by all means, he has a right to. In fact, I understand why perfectly fine. Fiction is something I've heavily immersed myself in for the past 4 years to escape from a constantly increasingly difficult life. 90% of the time, People go to fiction in stuff like anime, manga, and in my case, visual novels, to look away from realistic situations, and I'm much of the same. Trust me, there's nothing better than just kicking back to a nice, relaxing story after what you call finals. But because of that, a majority of anime, visual novels, etc. tend to be geared to more of those kinds of things. Escapism, having people enjoy themselves, etc. However, as a result, in terms of anime and manga at least, there's less creators that tackle realism in their works. And of course, why wouldn't they? People want to have fun, they want to enjoy themselves, and as an aspiring writer myself, I'd much rather see the worlds and characters that I create be happy in the end too. But Shinkai didn't do that with 5 centimeters per second. He didn't do that with Voices of a Distant Star. Nor did he do it with Garden of Words or Place Promised in Our Early Days. Shinkai's films focused on real emotions that could be felt, both positive and negative. Emotions that usually other media doesn't want to replicate due to it not being what people want to see in their escapism. It's not fun, it's not entertaining, so logically, yeah, most people won't care. And that's okay, but that's not how I feel. I miss that feeling of longing, that feeling of wanting to see someone precious to you again, that feeling of missing something, that feeling of wanting to enjoy a past long gone. That sense of wistful nostalgia is what made Shinkai films hit for me in the past. They were what made them stand out to me and what made me really fall in love with them. It's fine if others don't see things the same way, and it's fine if you enjoy his newer works compared to his older ones. But for me, it's just something I truly wish he would continue having. It's what made Shinkai special to me and me alone. However, in the end, it's not all bad. Far from it. In fact, even though his newer films won't be like that, his older works will always be there for me, and I can always rewatch them should I desire to. I guess the lack of that kind of story in this world would mean that 5 centimeters per second, Voices, and Early Days will all be films that I'll forever treasure, and become even more special to me over time. They are films that still inspire me and make me think to this day to create a story, one that will impact one person, like Shinkai did for me. Now in the end, would I say everyone's gonna enjoy Shinkai's films? Nah, but I think you should at least try them. Voices of a Distant Star would be the easiest to consume due to its length, and 5 centimeters per second is a classic I think everyone should know and try regardless. But that's just me, and that's just my thoughts on all of Shinkai's films. Why I appreciate that feeling of longing. With that being done, that's all I have for this video, and hopefully I'll see you all else later somewhere else on the internet. Until then, have a good day.